Welcome, friends, or welcome back, new listeners. This is Gary Schindler, and I am the host for the podcast, Ghost Towns of Freeborn County, and this is episode 5. What we're going to focus on in this episode is showcasing some of the ghost towns of Freeborn County, some very small and some that were reaching populations of nearly 1,000. And we will talk about today their origins, who settled in these communities, and what business establishments you might see in some of these communities. So the showcase today is going to be on the communities of Trenton, Dorwart, Crayon Park, and then some bigger entities, Bath, Bancroft, Sumner, and St. Nicholas. So let's just take a look first at the ghost town of Trenton, Freeborn County. Trenton is in the northwestern corner of Freeborn County. It was established in 1857 and survived till around 1890 to 1900. Some of the sources vary. The initial name for Trenton was Trenton Lake, and then eventually was named Trenton. There's a picture at the museum of the community of Trenton, and I hesitate to even call it a community. Again, another reminder as well is that this is a podcast for the Freeborn County Historical Museum and Village, and I also serve as a board member. So in Trenton, you'd go down a dirt road or a trail, and you would find a school, a church, a post office, and a blacksmith shop. And like every ghost town, nearly every ghost town in Freeborn County, there was also a creamery. There were no homes in Trenton, Freeborn County, but you would find living quarters above the blacksmith shop. If there was a general store, I think they had a general store for a brief period of time, there was a dwelling above that. The teacher may have lived within the school building, or there was a small structure next to her, next to the school. Concerning the creamery, that did fail in 1900, and that was sort of the death knell for Trenton. It was financed by a bank in New Richland, Minnesota, and that bank failed, and with the failure of the bank, the creamery also failed. The post office closed. That was in 1900. Post office closed in 1887. Again, another sign that things are going to come to an end. But when it comes to Trenton, they did have a school, and there are pictures, again, in the museum showcasing the young children of principally farm families that would consider Trenton part of their a connection with that small little village. But the school served, I would say, around 20 to 24 students. There's pictures of them outside the schoolhouse. There's also kind of a steeple part of that schoolhouse that had the bell, so that a little bit more ornate than you might see with some other schools. The other thing to point out, regardless of size, regardless of history, the Freeborn County Historical Society erected markers for these ghost towns, because in many cases there's nothing left of the ghost town. There's not a remnant of a building. Things were pretty well cleared out, converted back to farm fields. But the Freeborn County Historical Society in the mid to late 70s erected markers. So, for example, when it comes to Trenton, you'll find a Trenton marker, and it will note when the city was founded, when the year of its demise, and it'll have highlights of the community, many of which I have reviewed for you. So that's Trenton, Freeborn County. Another smaller ghost town that was really established based on hope. We mentioned in previous episodes that for your town to survive, you really needed a well-established business community or to be the county seat, and we have an episode that focuses on the race and the fight for the county seat in Freeborn County. Or if you can get the railroad to pass through your community, that could ensure your success. And Dorwart, D-O-R-W-A-R-T, is an example of a community that was established based on hope. That town, or that place of Dorwart, I don't even want to call it a town because the railroad did not go through and construction was not started on a lot of buildings that they hoped to establish. But it's south of Clark's Grove. I think actually there's a golf course near Clark's Grove, and that's where Dorwart was to be planned. So lots were platted in 1913. It's considered to be a location or a ghost town that had the shortest life in Freeborn County. The goal there was to establish a train depot, and so their construction was started on a depot a mile south of Clark's Grove, and it was built by the Burlington, Cedar Rapids, and North Railroad. And there was the hope to have 56 lots established in Dorwart for residents and business lots. That was 1900. 2 years later, what occurred is that the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad purchased the Burlington, Cedar Rapids, North Railroad, and the plans for Dorwart were essentially canceled. And so it became known as the shortest-lived ghost town. My understanding is that there was very little construction started. There was lots kind of envisioned, but it did not even come to be based on the purchase of the railroad from another entity. Another ghost town that we have no pictures, it is essentially a field, and it is called Crayon Park. And it is located in Section 6. It's part of the Oakland Township, which would be part of the eastern edge of Freeborn County, probably 2 miles off of the exit, the Oakland exit on I-90 going east. There's very little known of it. There's a map of it. There are some lots noted on it, but as far as we know, there's no remnant of Crayon Park that you can locate. I don't even think there's a marker for it. Now some ghost towns in Freeborn County that had a little bit more substance, a little bit longer history, and these will be profiles of Bath, Bancroft, Sumner, and St. Nicholas. So first, let's take a look at Bath. Bath, Freeborn County, is in the north central part of the county. You will see some remnants of Bath. I've been there, and you'll see a home that was likely built in the late 1800s, just based on some of the ornamentation on the outside of the home. But there's been multiple attempts to remodel, replace windows, some additions. It sits vacant now. There's also a barn that has some significant age to it. Again, I'm surmising late 1800s. But the principal remnant of Bath is the cemetery, and that is true for other ghost towns as well. To give you a sense of Bath, again, we're talking north central Freeborn County. In the 1880 census, Bath had a population of 919 residents, including surrounding farm families. So a town of some significance. It was described as an area of meadows and prairie with bur oak trees and dark sandy loam soil. And Bath consisted of around 2,500 acres. The name shifted. Initially, the name for Bath was Porter, and then changed to Bath, named after a city in England, or possibly the county seat of Steuben County in New York. The location of Bath today would be on the junction of County Road 20 and 35. Who settled in this community of over 900 people? Well, Danes were the majority, and that's somewhat common in the ghost towns of Freeborn County. You'll see populations dominated by Danes or possibly Irish, along with Scandinavians. The settlement of Bath included folks from England and Germany and Ireland, Norway, and there was a reference in historical documents to Americans that lived in Bath. And my understanding in talking to some other historians in Freeborn County is those were early residents that had acquired some land, claimed some land, but they were not connected to any community, but then joined the community of Bath. Just an interesting note, so we have a fairly diverse ethnic population there. But what occurred too is they did some their own policing. I mentioned there were some Germans that were settled in Bath, and there was a German by the name of Jacob Bauer, who was removed from the county by its board and the residents for selling alcohol to the Native American population. What you would find in Bath is a post office and store, a creamery, the North Star Creamery, and later named the Poplar Grove Creamery. And there was a school. There are pictures of the school. Bath did exist for a while. It was established in 1857 and was in existence as a community till 1963. One of the prominent features of Bath was the St. Aidan's Catholic Church that was built in 1899. Later on, that church building was moved to Ellendale, not part of Freeborn County, but moved to Ellendale in 1955. And now remnants of that church do exist in Ellendale, but now it's used to store meat by a meat processing firm or company in Ellendale, locally owned. Steve Meats. I'll throw in a plug for Steve Meats. So I did go out to the St. Aidan's Catholic Cemetery, and it's an interesting experience. So you're driving on the county road. You see some remnants of Bath with a barn and a home. That's about it. But then you go on a gravel road, and there's a marker for St. Aidan's Catholic Church. And as you're making that drive or into the cemetery, it is a cluster of trees that are sort of in the middle of a prairie. And then just walk and look around. It is a site that maybe takes your breath away. Markers for folks that were buried there that passed in the early 1900s, Irish, Danes. But in the middle of that cemetery is a large, I call it an altar, that is very well maintained, but is just a beautiful, beautiful structure in the middle of this Catholic cemetery for Bath, Freeborn County. So that's the community of Bath. The next ghost town I want to take a look at that had, again, some more substance to it was the ghost town of Bancroft. 939 residents in the census of 1880. Bancroft is located north of Albert Lea. It's the current location of the Good Samaritan Retirement Center. Bancroft was established in 1855, and according to records was in existence for about 5 years to 1860. and then reestablished as New Bancroft in 1890, and then essentially faded by 1965. In 1855, so again, Bancroft's one of our early communities in Freeborn County. It was described as prairies, 3/4 of it covered by burr and jack oak trees that were removed for farming, because the soil near Bancroft was described as a dark loam soil. There was efforts for Bancroft to be considered for the county seat. When the territorial legislature met to initially establish a county seat, there was a motion put on the floor to have Bancroft serve that role, but that was repealed. And then in 1857, there was an election. Bancroft was on the ballot, and it did not win. Albert Lee did. And so buildings were literally moved, and Bancroft ceased to be a village within Freeborn County. Bancroft was named after George Bancroft. And again, an interesting thing about the naming of this community is that the folks in Freeborn County had a true sense of history and were aware of key historical events and prominent people. So, for example, Bancroft was named after George Bancroft, who served as the Secretary of Navy in the United States. George Bancroft founded Annapolis Naval Academy, and he was also an ambassador to England. So a very prominent American, and Bancroft was named after him. What you'd find in Bancroft: a sawmill, a town hall, post office, a creamery, a saloon, a general store, and they did have a newspaper, the Bancroft Press. The editor for that newspaper was David Blakely, and David Blakely eventually became the editor for the St. Paul Pioneer Press. So we have a connection to that Metro newspaper. After the election, again, what occurred is that the town started to fail, and buildings were moved. So here's an example. The post office was moved to Itasca, which again is a village or a ghost town that's near Albert Lee, northeast part of Albert Lee. And the general store was moved to Austin in 1859. Some other things about Bancroft. Again, Bancroft consisted of 23,000 acres. The reputation for Bancroft in the area was that it had a very rich farmland, and as a result, a lot of tree removal. A little story related to Bancroft. One of the early settlers was an H.R. Lomas, who took a stagecoach to Dubuque, Iowa, and then walked to Freeborn County the rest of the way and settled in Bancroft. Some photos that you will find at the museum are photos of the creamery, general store. Some other photos would include another general store photo from the early 1900s. There's remnants of a town hall that was established in 1858. Has new siding on it, so I would surmise that behind that steel siding is the remnants of a early town hall for Bancroft. And as I mentioned, the current location of Bancroft is taken up by the Good Samaritan Retirement Center. Like many of the ghost towns in Freeborn County, you will find a marker there noting the village of Bancroft. Old Bancroft is on the marker, and then also further down you'll find a notation for New Bancroft. Old Bancroft 1856 to 1860, New Bancroft 1890 to 1965. Now let's take another look at a ghost town in Freeborn County, and this is the ghost town of Sumner. Sumner, let me just try to describe where that is at. It is northeast of Hayward, in between Sigsbee and Oakland. Sigsbee is a ghost town that we haven't made much reference to, but let's just say it's northeast of Hayward, Minnesota. The ghost town of Sumner was established by Rufus Crum in 1857 and existed as a community till about 1876, or so for about 20 years. The claim to fame for Sumner, I would say, was that it was a stagecoach stop between Austin and Albert Lea. So it saw some traffic, and there was the establishment of a community there. The principal features in Sumner were a school, church, some homes, and a post office. The museum has a picture from 1901 of the schoolhouse, and again, you are looking at, that school serving, I would say, up to 36 kids at one time. There are remnants near Sumner. I have a picture from 1949 of a hotel that was built near the ghost town of Sumner, and also a clearing in the small patch of woods that is remnants of the Stagecoach Road. And also you'll find an older barn. So you can find some artifacts, let's say, from the community of Sumner. And then finally, one of my favorites is the village of St. Nicholas. St. Nicholas was a contender for the county seat, and some interesting stories around that fight for the county seat. St. Nicholas is on the south side of Albert Lea. It's on South Shore Drive, and it was located on the shores of Albert Lea Lake. There were great hopes for St. Nicholas. Some founding fathers referred to the potential of a metropolis being built in that location or established in that location, and really kind of considered the great hope of Freeborn County. The founders of St. Nicholas were Jacob Librand, who was a French trader, and a Samuel Thompson, who was from Green Bay. There's a lot of firsts associated with St. Nicholas. It was the first community established in Freeborn County in 1855. It had the first blacksmith shop, first post office, first hotel, the first general store and trading post where the Native Americans would trade animal skins for goods. And it was one of the contenders for the county seat. It lost that vote, and essentially what the founders did is that they took the buildings down and moved many of them to Alexandria. This is Librand and Thompson. To get an understanding of how that's possible, because it was fairly common, the construction of the buildings in much of Freeborn County and in many of these ghost towns was panel construction. So you'd have a frame, but the panels, the walls of these buildings were one solid panel or perhaps two pieces that were then attached to the pole frames that made up the skeleton of the building. And they were expensive to build and took a lot of labor. So when these towns started to fail, there would be folks that would come and simply disassemble and move them to another location. In this case, this is probably the farthest location that any Freeborn County ghost town had its buildings moved, and that was to Alexandria. So losing that county seat was a major blow to St. Nicholas. But there were some efforts to entrepreneurial folks in Freeborn County that wanted to see this work. And one of the ideas that was hatched was to perhaps merge the two communities of of St. Nicholas and Albert Lea into one large community. And here's the tale that is told here by the founders of St. Nicholas. And here's the account. Looking eastward from his mill on Fountain Lake, Albert Lea pioneer George Rubel believed that someday St. Nicholas would be the largest city in the area. So he walked to St. Nicholas to work out a deal. Recalling his talk with Librand, Rubel later wrote, "About the time St. Nicholas was founded, I went and looked over the proposition and came to the conclusion that the situation was in every way equal to Albert Lea, and that the mill power was ever so much better than the one that I was trying to improve in Albert Lea." So we have, again, this need for water power, and Rubel's assessment was that St. Nicholas had better water power to establish the mill. So therefore, this is again Rubel continuing, so therefore I made a proposition to Librand to unite town interest and influence and build a mill, procure the county seat for a merged community of Albert Lea and St. Nicholas, and procure the county seat and make the future metropolis of St. Nicholas. So Rubel was willing to compromise a bit and even allow St. Nicholas to assume the name of this merged community. The idea was met by a cold stare from Librand. He replied to Rubel, "You may quit Albert Lea and move here, but unite the towns, never. We'll build the mill and we'll have the county seat too." But Albert Lea became the county seat in 1857, and St. Nicholas died shortly after that occurred. So again, that the moving of that occurred, the town disappeared, but you can see remnants of it. There's a great story. I'm going to tell that in episode 6 of Ghost Towns of Freeborn County. Some interesting finds once the folks vacated that city or that ghost town of St. Nicholas. So first of all, I do want to mention too that St. Nicholas, I'm looking at my population map here, I don't see it noted as far as what its population was. So we'll forego that. But traveling in that area, there are remnants of St. Nicholas along the county road. You'll see a bare spot in some scattered cropping of trees that held granary and a mill. To the south of the county road along Albert Lea Lake, you'll see again a clearing, a path, maybe 15, 20 feet wide. That was a stagecoach road that went through that area of St. Nicholas. There is also it was called an Indian Trail that went along Albert Lea Lake between Albert Lea and Austin, but you'll see the remnants of a stagecoach road where St. Nicholas used to be. And there's also a house that is collapsing on itself that was established there by a gentleman I spoke to in the 1930s. You can still see that. A lot of folks don't know it's there, but it is. The roof is gone, and some of the walls are collapsing. But again, it's just good to go to these places and see that there are some remnants of that community still there. But I have a great story about St. Nicholas, and that's going to be in episode 6. So I will leave you for now. That's a profile of some of the ghost towns of Freeborn County. And the last episode of this podcast, episode 6, will be Stories of the Strange and Unusual in Freeborn County, Minnesota. This is Gary Schindler, historian and board member for the Freeborn County Historical Society, Museum, and Village.
This collaboration is made possible by the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund through the vote of Minnesotans on November 4th, 2008, administered by the Minnesota Historical Society.